Tonight, on Closer Look, Doug Ford is making it his mission to have bike lanes on Bloor Street, University Avenue, and Yonge Street removed. That move has now sparked the launch of a charter challenge against that law. Toronto Today reporter Aidan Chimanti is here with the latest and joins us from Toronto. Aidan, before we get to the who and why, let's start with some background detail for context. What's the backstory on these bike lanes, and how did we get to this point?
So Doug Ford was a Toronto City Councillor before he was Premier. He's from Etobicoke, which is a western suburb of Toronto, and both he and his brother have hated bike lanes for going on decades now. Rob Ford was famous for saying that there's a war on the car and he's going to be the one to reverse it. And in the kind of late 2010s, early 2020s is when Toronto's bike lane expansion plan really kind of got on steroids, and that included putting bike lanes west on Bloor Street, which goes into Etobicoke, which is where the Premier lives. So these were a thing that he'd hated for a long time, but now that they were in his neck of the woods, became a very real problem for him.
Okay, so the charter challenge has been filed by Cycle Toronto, a nonprofit organization whose mission, they say, is to make Toronto a healthy, safe, and vibrant cycling city for all and to individual cyclists. What is the basis for their argument against Doug Ford's Bill 212?
Basically, it's that removing these bike lanes will cause harm to cyclists because if they now want to bike on Bloor, University, or Yonge, they will be in traffic. And if you're in traffic versus a protected bike lane, you're more likely to be hit by a car or doored or something like that.
Now, are there any legal precedents that exist in Canada for using the Charter of Rights and Freedoms to challenge infrastructure decisions like these?
Not really that I know of. I think the kind of biggest parallel here is actually recent charter decisions that we've seen from some courts on encampments. So one of the things that those court rulings has said is that, people don't necessarily have a right to sleep in parks, but if governments want to remove people from parks, you kind of have to do it in a way that respects their Section 7 charter rights, which is the right to life, liberty, and the security of the person. So the parallel there between bike lanes and encampments would be, if you want to clear people out of encampments, you have to make sure that there's adequate shelter space to move them into. Here, it would be if you want to remove bike lanes on major streets, you have to ensure that there are adequate secondary routes that these cyclists could go.
All right.
I'm not sure if a lawyer would say that's a direct parallel, but that's kind of what's going on in my mind.
Okay, that's good context. Let's talk about the traffic and congestion, which is at issue here. The province claims that ripping up the bike lanes will reduce congestion and improve traffic flow. We also know that a government draft document that leaked a few weeks back, in fact, said that's maybe not the case. So what do we actually know to be true here?
Well, I just got to shout out my reporting and the fellow folks at the Trillium in Toronto today. We were the ones that obtained that document that said that, set off a little bit of a firestorm. So I can totally understand why people would think that putting in bike lanes on a 3-lane road, reducing it down to 2, would make congestion worse. That just kind of makes intuitive sense. But all the research that we've seen from around the world, whether it be in Toronto, whether it be in New York, whether it be in Copenhagen, places where there's a lot more bikes, says that it really doesn't have a super appreciable impact on congestion. It does, but I think around 72 seconds was the biggest impact that Toronto City staff had seen. So basically, the Premier doesn't believe that. I believe his words were that is hogwash. So we're kind of having a basic debate about the facts here.
All right, let's talk about Mayor Olivia Chow. What's her position, and how will that factor in influencing public opinion as this charter challenge plays out?
So during the 2022 mayoral by-election, when Olivia Chow won to replace John Tory, a lot was made about how she is a cyclist. There was a big gesture that she made to cyclists on her first day of work. She biked into Toronto City Hall. There was a big courtier of supporters behind her, and actually some fantastic reporting from my fellow folks at the Trillium suggested that where Statistics Canada data shows that people primarily bike to work, those were places that more voted for Olivia Chow. So she has obviously come out against this, but the city really doesn't have a lot of levers to draw on here because, as we know, cities are the creature of the province, and if the province, as cities jump, cities kind of have to say how high. So we don't really know how she is going to challenge this other than just kind of taking on the bully pulpit. It's really not clear if there are a ton of legal mechanisms that she can draw on that could actually stop this. But at the November city council meeting, there was kind of a funny little motion passed to ask city staff to investigate the feasibility of installing signs on these streets where the bike lanes are going to be ripped up to say that the resulting congestion that comes from the ripping up and the construction is the fault of Premier Doug Ford and Bill 212. I don't think those signs will actually get put up.
All right. I know it's early days, but how has the Ford government responded to the argument that removing bike lanes violates the Charter's guarantee to life, liberty, and the security of the person?
Hogwash, in the words of the Premier. Hogwash was the exact term that he used to describe this. And I'm drawing from the previous comments. But I mean, everything that we know about the Premier, the government, what they think about cyclists, and how they really privilege drivers' issues in their politics and policies like this is not really going to fly with them. And kind of the big thing is, even if an injunction is granted in this case that either stops or delays the removal of these bike lanes, and even if the case is ultimately successful beyond the injunction, the Premier can just invoke the notwithstanding clause. He's not been shy to do that before. Section 7, which is the section of the Constitution that is at issue here, is something that can be overridden by the notwithstanding clause. And kind of given how big of a wedge issue that this has been and how central this has been to the government's communications in recent months, especially heading into an election, I do not see a world where the government would not hesitate to push the notwithstanding clause button.
All right. Lastly, Aidan, the challenge has been filed. Can you walk us through maybe what the next steps in the process are and what the timing might look like?
Timing, I'm sorry to say, I'm not exactly sure of, but the first thing that would happen, so the suit has asked for two things: an injunction, which would stop the removal of the bike lanes, at least temporarily, while the case itself is argued on its merits. So if an injunction is granted, then I think you could probably say that you could definitely say that the courts think that the plaintiffs have some kind of case here, which might give an indication as to the potential success of the larger lawsuit. But it's really early days, and it's kind of hard to tell right now because this really was just filed. But the injunction is absolutely the first thing to watch out for.
Toronto Today's City Hall reporter Aidan Chimandy on tonight's Closer Look.